So you just purchased a Lumix G9ii and you've got this great idea to record video on an SSD. We probably want to talk about that. Okay guys, today I wanted to talk about recording video onto the Lumix G9ii and some of the things you definitely will want to be aware of before embarking on this journey and purchasing a drive for your system. You can plug in an SSD drive similar to this Samsung T7 along with a USB-C cable and record directly to the SSD drive, which is actually a really cool feature to have. There's definitely reasons you would want to do this, and there's definitely reasons that you wouldn't. So let's go through some of the pitfalls that I faced when I tried to do this for my camera. First of all, there's some ground rules when it comes to using SSD drives for these cameras. The first one is do not use anything bigger than 2 terabytes. At least that's what's recommended for the G9. I don't know if the S5 2X can do bigger or the GH6, but it specifically says when you plug in a 4 terabyte drive into your camera, drive too big. The second thing that I would recommend, and I wouldn't even say highly recommend, I would just say do this. Only buy the drives that are recommended by Panasonic, because any other drives are going to give you a problem. And the problem shows up like this. I've tried several SSD drives just to see if they would work. And when you plug them in and you hit record, it seems to be working fine. And then all of a sudden, about a minute, 2 minutes, 5 minutes in, it just stops and it says recording has stopped. Drive cannot keep up with the pace, or whatever it says, or some message basically saying it can't handle the throughput. It doesn't make any sense because these drives have a higher throughput than the camera even requires, but I'll go more into that in a minute. Currently, there's 3 drives that work with this, and I'll put the links below. It's a SanDisk, a Samsung T5, and a Samsung T7. Now, the Samsung T7 is one that I had laying around, so I decided to try that one. But in hindsight, if I didn't have a drive at all, I would not buy the T7 right out of the gate, because you have to update the firmware first on the T7 before it works properly with your camera. I promise you it won't work. This firmware does not like to run on Apple Silicon, so you have to go to a PC or an Intel Mac to make this work best, and you have to update the firmware, but once you do, it works fine. But honestly, save yourself the hassle. Just buy a T5 Samsung or one of the SanDisk units and call it a day. My goal with recording onto the SSD was going to be plug it in, make a recording, unplug it, plug it into my computer, and just start editing right off of that drive. That's kind of what I wanted to do. And you kind of can, but here's the caveat. When you plug this drive into your camera, what happens is your camera formats this drive just like it formats an SD card. So you're going to have the DCIM folder and whatever else that other folder is that's there, and it's going to have the file structure just like an SD card. So here's what I ran into when I was using Final Cut Pro 10 along with the SD. I'd take the SD and plug it up here, and then I would take the other end and plug it into my camera. I'd start my recordings, I'd finish my recordings, I'd unplug the SSD, plug it into my computer. When I would try to import into Final Cut, I would select leave in place, but it was grayed out. It would not allow me to leave the files in place on this drive that I just recorded onto. For some reason, I couldn't figure it out. But what happens is Final Cut sees the SSD drive with that same file structure as the SD cards, and it will say to itself, oh, that's an SD card, so I'm going to require that footage be imported and brought to the operating disk in order to be used in Final Cut Pro, which makes sense because Final Cut's thinking, well, A, it's slow to edit off of an SD card. Even though this isn't an SD card, Final Cut thinks it is. And B, it might be the only copy you have. So if anything goes wrong with that card during edit, then you lose your original file. So Final Cut's kind of smart in saying that I'm not going to allow you to do that. So I'm going to make you bring the information into the computer first, and then you can edit. But there's a little bit of a workaround, and I did some reading on Reddit. And what people do is they just make another folder on the SSD drive. And after they finish recording on their Lumix camera, once they plug it into the computer, they'll just go to the DCIM folder, grab all their files that they just recorded, and drag and drop them over into the other folder on the SSD drive. And I believe you can download that into FCPX and leave in place and allow you to edit right off the drive. So that's a workaround I think that works pretty well. So there you have it. You've got the Samsung drive, the T7, the T5, and you've got SanDisk drives that all work up to 2 terabytes. And just for your information, I have ProRes at the max resolution on this camera, not running now, but I have ProRes at max resolution running before, and it said 1 hour for 1 terabyte, so it's going to be like 2 hours for 2 terabytes. That's pretty good. And it's like 990 whatever bits a second rate. Here's the thing. You got to ask yourself, why am I doing it and do I need it? And I'm not saying that just because you don't need it, you shouldn't want it or you shouldn't do it. But what I am saying is, what are you gaining from it? What's it doing for you? If it's a workflow thing, then I'm all in. That's kind of what I was thinking. But there's some considerations you have to make when thinking of this just for workflow. If you're going to plug this up to your camera and every time you're finished recording, you're going to unplug it and plug it into your computer, well, how many of those plug in and outs on your port is it going to take to break the USB-C cable? Maybe a lot, maybe not many, I don't know. And it is the only charging port on the camera other than the battery port. So it's kind of a cable area that I would want to protect. The other question is, you could put a lock on it and secure it and then just unplug your drive. But then again, that's going to burn up a cable or maybe mess up your drive over time. I mean, the USB-C is a superior plug to all the other USB types, but it's still just a port and a plug that's going to plug in and plug out. I'm not so sure from a workflow issue if it's going to make any sense to do that, because I've become pretty good at one-handed just grabbing these SD cards and popping them in, burning all the stuff down to the drive. It doesn't take long to do. So unless I really have to have that resolution and that color space and that perfect file format, I don't know that it's going to benefit me that much. Most of the stuff I'm putting on YouTube is compressed anyway, which brings me to why I bought the S5 II over the S5 IIX, is because all that extra video stuff would require gearing out, cabling, rigging, and extra money, all for a workflow that I really don't utilize. So ask yourself if it's really worthwhile. If you do have a T7 or a T5 laying around, have some fun with it and try it out, see how you like it. But honestly, in my work cases, it's just not going to be practical, or I'm not going to use it. One thing I'm going to try, and I'll feed back to you guys later on this, I think they make a switch, which sounds pretty interesting. So hang with me for a second. Let's say you took this cable right here and you took it from your camera to a switch. And let's say you took another cable from your computer to the switch. And out of the front of the switch is one unified cable. So on the desk, I could have this SSD plugged right into the switch. And out of the back of the switch, I have 2 locations. I have the camera and I have the computer. And I have a button on top of that switch that says pick one or the other. Now, if I can get it to where I can hit 1 and 2 and switch back and forth with the touch of a button, and the camera will still recognize the SSD drive and work and record to it, that could be a solution on my desktop where I just put everything together. I do a recording on camera 1 setting, and then when I'm done with the recording, turn the camera off and hit click over to 2, and then it loads the drive onto the computer, all with the switch of a button. Then maybe I could get a workflow that would work like that. I don't know. I have to do a little experimenting. Sounds expensive, but we'll find out. You guys, thanks for watching, and be careful when getting these. 2 terabytes only. Don't go over that amount. You want to get a recommended SSD drive. So the recommended drives are down below. The drive links are down below. And I'm going to even try to link you the firmware for the T7 if I can find it down below. So hopefully all that helps. You guys, thank you so much. I'll talk to you soon. Later.